Hello, everyone, and welcome to our newest podcast. This is the SecFlux podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Stacy, and this is Joe. And Joe, I have a question for you.
What's that?
What is SecFlux, the podcast, about?
Information security related topics.
All right, information security related topics. Would you say that when it comes to information security topics, that it's going to be a little bit of everything, or do you think that there's going to be a lean in a certain direction or something to that effect?
Since yeah, I can't talk. Since
You said sex.
I know.
Ooh. That's one of my favorite typos is accidentally always typing cybersex instead of cybersex, just to put that out there. But go ahead with your actual answer.
Now you're showing your age from your AOL days.
Yeah. AOL and Trillion.
Right? Next thing you know, you're going to be wanting to talk on ICQ.
Oh.
So SecFlux is a news aggregation site, and it has a lot of different topics that it aggregates news for. So the podcast will probably be about the related topics that are in the news and headlines on the site itself, or something that is of a lot of discussion around the community.
Yes. And one such discussion that we see a lot of whenever it comes to information security as a whole is, I would say leadership. And something I wanted to ask you, as someone who has been in a leadership position, what makes a leader whenever it comes to information security in your own eyes?
That's difficult to answer, right? It really depends on the context and what's happening. What makes a leader, from my perspective, is someone who tries to enable their team and provides for their team to get the work done, whatever it is they're trying to do. Right? They don't burden the team with all the details they need, the supplies they need, the communications they need, the people they need to talk to. They basically are paving the road for them so they can go without any obstacles.
Yeah. That's perfect. No notes. I mean, some notes, only in the form of more questions for you. Did you know that you were going to get interrogated today?
I didn't.
You didn't.
No.
This is a cold reading for everything. So, something that you said that stood out was, communication, right? And that's
right.
a big topic of what I want to talk about is when it comes to cybersecurity and leadership and all of these things, communication is a huge aspect of it. I see cybersecurity as very much a people-centric industry, and the importance of transparency and communication is just like so epitomized. And I'd like to give a little bit of background to how we came to this topic. When you asked me, actually, you didn't even ask. Let's start there. Let's talk about how the conversation that came about via text that led us to what we're doing and where we're at right now. Let's go through that a little bit. Do you want to start, or would you like me to start?
Sure. So around the end of December,
you're already a little defensive in your voice. This is funny.
Around the end of December, Stacy asked me if I was ready to do another podcast, and I told her no, I'm not thinking about doing another podcast right now. Right? We kind of left it at that. So fast forward to earlier this week, I just sent her a text message that said, "Okay,"
and that was it. Let me be very clear. It was just okay out of nowhere at I don't know, what was it, noon on a Sunday or something.
Yeah.
And I just send back, okay. Not knowing what the context was. And then what did you say back? You said something along the lines of, so what is the topic going to be for discussion? And I said back, clear and transparent communication and the importance of that, based on you starting that conversation with just, okay.
Right. I knew that was a shot at me, but it was humorous.
It was. And yes, it was obviously very much a joke, but at the same time, it's something that I see just replicated because I talk to so many organizations, so many different people within the community that echo a lot of the same sentiments when it comes to communication, that there's a lack of it, and that there's that, or a lot of people communicate in such different ways that it's really, really difficult sometimes to even just kind of understand where someone might be coming from. And one of the things that I like to bring up, being someone that's neurodivergent, I like to have very direct conversations, right?
Right.
Right. And not everyone's like that. So there's this really interesting concept that I like to talk about. Is something that I can relate with in being someone that's direct, but this isn't a direct thing. So I'm going to start with a concept and we can kind of branch out from there. Have you heard of the term cute aggression?
Can you repeat that?
Cute aggression.
Cute aggression.
CUTE aggression. Yeah.
No, I have not.
It's this, I love talking about this, is a super interesting phenomenon where something is so cute that you can't stand it and you get upset, but in a way that's like, it feels like a release or a relief. So it's when you see your dog or your cat or some type of animal and you're like, I just want to squeeze it. Like you get like that. And it's, typically the way that you act, like your eyebrows are going down and you're getting really almost like elevated and upset, but the emotion that you have is positive, right? That's not how people usually anticipate a positive feeling to feel, but it is. Like when you want to hug something really tight, that's called cute aggression. And it's a real phenomenon. And so the interesting thing to me about communications and how we can express particular emotions is that even though there are certain expectations around, how someone might react to something, it may be different than what you actually do expect in that circumstance. Because a lot of people might be like, oh, it's so cute. That's so sweet. That's so nice. And then other people literally cannot help it. And they're like, I want to squeeze it. But they don't want to actually do that, right? It's just the feeling that they get. And
Okay.
I know what you're thinking. Like, where is this going?
No, I'm thinking to myself, that's some serious cognitive dissonance there.
It's not. It's real. I promise. So uh, I bring this up because there are so many different ways to communicate the same thing, and I feel like that is true in all different kinds of people across all different types of mediums and communities and within industries. So when you're working with different types of people, one of the important things, whether you're a leader or not, is just figuring out how to communicate with people and what their communication style is. And I think that's really important. There are a lot of people who, like myself, I mentioned, really appreciate transparency, directness. And then there are other people, and this isn't a dig at, I come up with an example. This isn't a dig at my mom, but then there are other people who like will imply things or will never say something direct because they feel like that's rude or something like that. They feel like they can't ask for something directly or they can't say something directly.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that? Have you personally throughout your time have you experienced things like this where you just had a complete breakdown of communication or you didn't understand where someone was coming from and you had an aha moment?
Uh, those times happen, right? But I think for the most part, I kind of have a good sense of that when it's happening, and or an understanding when it's going to happen. And I think that goes all the way back to earlier in life teaching martial arts. When you're teaching martial arts, people who walk in the door typically have no experience, no understanding of the language, the movements, or anything. So you're talking to someone that can't speak the language right off the bat. So you have to find a way to relay these concepts and these ideas and philosophies to these people and educate them at the same time about what they came to you for. And the best approach I found to that is to get to know the person. What do they do? What's their career? How do they think? And what words are they familiar with? How can I make analogies to explain things to concepts they already understand? And that kind of bridges that communication gap. And I guess that now it's just subconsciously I'm aware of that when I talk to people or interact with people when I'm explaining something that just naturally takes place organically.
Yeah. And you made a really good point of, using analogies or like speaking in a quote unquote language that someone else can understand, because whenever it comes down to it, that's something that I also notice too, especially when you get into these really technical topics where you will have someone who's explaining something and they might not know how to do that in a way that's conducive to a broader audience. And I found as I continue to progress in my career, how important it is to be able to do things like that, to be able to talk at different levels and understand when that's appropriate to do it. Can you think of a circumstance in which in the middle, or in the midst of that happening where you're presenting, that you kind of realize like these people don't know what I'm saying.
I
Have you?
I don't I guess I would say my first 5 presentations maybe,
Okay.
right? But as you grow as a presenter, and if you study the art, of presenting, you kind of gauge your audience topic, and you start framing your talk, your synopsis, your bio, and everything ahead of time to speak to a certain audience, right?
Mhm.
And hopefully the conference places you or markets you appropriately for, hey, this is requires some assumed knowledge, or this is an entry level talk, or something like that. That helps address that. But I kind of, as I'm watching the room as I'm talking, I'm looking for those signs of confusion, right?
Mhm.
The those people who don't follow me or don't track, and I'll actually just say, hey, you look like you understand. Let me explain, or give another angle on it, or something like that. If I see a head nod, okay. If not, I might go a little bit further until I find something that resonates with them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've definitely had moments like that where I could tell, again, this was I would do training or onboarding for particular companies too as another facet of my role. So I'd be training some groups of technical and non-technical people, and there were times where I could tell, like you see the other nerds in the audience or on the Zoom screen or whatever, they're lighting up, and then you see other people like either they go off camera or they look glossed over, or you can tell they're working on something else, and it's like, well, clearly I'm reaching half of the audience and the other half is just like whatever, and I think it is important to not only recognize that and have awareness, but to also kind of make those adjustments as that happens, as you're mentioning, like maybe my first 5, but when you start to see that happen more, hopefully you change your approach.
Right. And to follow up on that is when you're presenting or talk or giving a topic, a training, or communicating, whatever the case may be, and you see the multitaskers in there, you can't really overcome that. Sometimes people have
Mhm.
something they have to deal with. They're just not engaged. Maybe they just had lunch. Focus on the people that are engaged and alert, and are giving you that energy back. Because if you focus too much on the negative people, it will start to deflate your enthusiasm of whatever you're doing, and it'll transfer over in your voice, right? So be mindful of that.
That's actually really good advice. Because I do have a tendency to try to, when I present or teach or do whatever you would want to call it in a workshop, I try to be cognizant of everyone. But yeah, focusing on the positive is a really good way to not, I don't know, bury yourself or make yourself feel bad when you shouldn't be.
Right.
So another thing that I did want to mention whenever it comes to communication in general, like we were talking about oh my goodness gracious, how diverse it is, why being transparent is important. I want to get a little bit more into that. So in the past, you and I have talked about things like radical candor and the importance of setting boundaries and all of those different types of things. So, there have been times in the past, again, where I've been a part of meetings or discussions where one, I feel like things are being left out. And you kind of talked about some of that whenever I first asked you, like what it means to be a leader. And it's providing them with necessary information that is concise and valuable for them to know. But I feel like oftentimes some of that is just completely omitted in some circumstances, right? Where people
Mhm.
feel like they're left in the dark. So there has to be that balance, and people have to be like clued into the greater, I don't know, scope of what's going on.
Right.
So radical candor. Tell me your feelings about that, because I think we've had, I don't even know how many conversations about it at this point.
Uh, Going back to that concept, just being radically candid with someone when they need feedback, whether it be positive or negative, right?
Mhm.
If they're making a mistake, or they need to go in a different direction, or some coaching or some guidance, oftentimes if you try and sugarcoat it or avoid it, you end up doing more harm to the person in the long term, right? Overall, next thing you know, they're parting ways with the company, as opposed to going, look, you're not doing too good at this, and this has to improve, or there's not a whole lot I can do for you if you're not going to get on the same page. you know and we have a discussion. I may not be that blunt. In all honesty, I may say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what the results need to be, this is where they are. Do you know why we aren't on the same page, right? And get them engaged in that thought process. And if they can't get there, I become more candid into the conversation. Okay. Sometimes you have to get to be blunt to get to some people.
Hmm.
And you have to be aware of that. Is this a person that I need to maybe tread a little bit lightly on? Or does this person really appreciate, and I'm one of these people, just tell me right to my face, this shit sucks.
Yes, I
Right?
am the same way. Please tell me if it's awful. And I completely agree with this. There's a balance too, like anything else, like even though we're calling it radical and it's supposed to be extreme, you still want to preserve someone's feelings and have empathy. One of the most valuable conversations I had, surprisingly, was whenever I was at a previous job and I was paired with a mentor because we were doing this pilot mentor program where I elected to be a mentee in this case. And the person that I was paired with, I told them some of the struggles that I had, and she taught me this concept of being kind over being nice, which is very similar to radical candor in the sense that, like you said, being nice is something like sugarcoating. It's sparing someone's feelings. It's just trying to smooth someone over, be a peacekeeper, and it could be where it's not needed. But being kind is doing the thing that's right by both of you and delivering that information in a way that's helpful to where and supportive to where it doesn't hurt them necessarily, but it's saying like, hey, like you're not listen, you know, you might not be doing that well of a job, but we can fix it, right?
Right.
And making sure that honesty and that transparency is there, because if you're not telling someone where they're going wrong, how are they going to fix it? I think it's that simple.
That goes to being a good leader. That's one of the skills you need as a leader. If you're going to lead someone, you have to be able to provide the necessary feedback and keep them going in the right direction. And also, like one of the most important things I did when I was leading a large team, is our one on ones. Right? Everybody hates one on ones. My one on ones were never about work. My one-on-ones are about them. Hey, what's going on? What are you doing? How's everything going? And let them guide the conversation. They can talk about whatever they want to. And what that does is it gives me insight into what's actually happening in their life. Are they experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of family problems, some outside forces that are stressors? That tells me a lot, when I see performance going in the wrong direction. Like, well, they've got a lot going on. Maybe they need a break. They need some PTO. They need some time. Maybe they need another duty to give them more time. Maybe I need to get them out of here at lunch and give them half a day, right? To
Duty.
help make things better.
You
What's that?
said, sorry, I was laughing. I was still stuck on duty. Yeah,
Is this a
no.
Beavis and Butthead moment you're having here?
No. Uh I completely agree with that too, with all of that too, because you know that is that is like transcends beyond communication, right? That's like going into figuring out someone's circumstances and being able to communicate with them on a deeper level because you're more understanding what's going on in their life and you're being able to help them work through those things by giving them that guidance and helping them to manage their workload in the context of work too, right? Because if someone is having all of those issues, like let's say they're, going through divorce or their pet died or they're having all of these health complications or something like that, it's not going to be fun for them to have to try to balance all that and be working on top of everything else. So having an awareness of that is incredibly important when it comes to communication because I don't think it's just talking, right? It's talking and it's listening and it's emoting and trying to figure out where people stand and where they're coming from.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever another thing I noticed in terms of communication, and we are talking about fixing things, right? When you're in a technical position or you're an engineer, an architect, all these technical roles, we are so inclined to want to fix things that might not even be our problem. Um, I run into this all the time, like at any organization that I work at, and this is how should I put this? I find wherever I go, I find something that could be fixed, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
a communication problem, whether it's a documentation problem, um, whether it's, some type of technical control, whatever it might be, because there are different platforms that people can communicate on. There are different things that can impede communication or just make it more difficult, especially when you know, uh, there's remote cultures and that sort of thing. So, in your experiences too, how has remote work, which is it's been around for a while, but it blew up a couple of years ago where more people were doing it, obviously because of the pandemic. But how do you think that's changed some of the ways that you're transparent or you communicate? Do you feel like you have to over communicate?
I actually find it easier to communicate remotely, right?
I do
Because
too. I
where
definitely
I'll
do.
give you an example. I was leading a team of penetration testers at this one organization, and it was actually easier for us to have a candid conversation remotely, not
Mhm.
in the office, about things that were going on and perspectives on those, right? As opposed, you go into the office and you might want to talk about things candidly, right? And just be honest, where you don't feel like you have that full ability in an office setting.
Yeah, when it's in your home, it somehow makes it feel different. Or, it could be anywhere, but typically in your home. So, for example, let's talk about some of those differences of us being on site versus, how we communicate in person. Because I remember when we had worked together, a lot of our communication was, when I would first get there, and then we would do things like go to lunch and we would do it, there. It was over email, all kinds of different things. Um, and I've noticed kind of what you're saying too. It does happen differently in person. Like when it is in person, I've found actually no, I don't think it's more silly in person than it is remotely. Now that I'm like thinking through different scenarios, but I feel like when I'm personally in person, I have a tendency to like want to be more silly and slack off just for I don't know, for whatever reason. I feel more inclined to my chaos monkey ways whenever that's a factor.
I think that's the extrovert side of you, right? It's easier to be an introvert at home remotely.
Uh-huh. It
And
is.
and
I think yeah, in that too. I do have a lot of extroverted qualities, but I don't even know if I think I'm more of an ambivert because I'm also very introverted in many ways. But that's just my own self-assessment, having my own introspection and insight. So, what about you? How do you feel about how you've been communicating topics as of late, or how you feel about your own, sort of transparency to either your team or it can be in your personal life? Do you feel like you've been sharing more about yourself and cluing people into things that you have going on?
I would say over the past year, yeah, I've had to. I kind of got forced in that situation, and I won't go into that. To being more transparent with people I usually wouldn't be transparent with, right?
Mhm.
And have some conversations and talk about, hey, this is what's going on in my life, and things like that. And as far as the team, um, so where I work now, we don't have a lot of team meetings or one on ones or things like that, but we are very transparent with our communication throughout the day as we're working together, and we share information and ask questions. Everybody knows what the responsibilities are, and everybody takes off and runs with it, right? And the organization I work with today is one of the most transparent companies I have ever worked for, right? If something that, inevitably people leave an organization, right? In most organizations, you don't know about it you're like 3 weeks later, and like, where did that person go?
Mhm.
Right? As soon as someone comes or into the company or leaves the company, there's an email from the CEO, the owner, hey, this is a new person, or hey, it didn't work out with this person for whatever reason, and we are parting ways with them. We wish them the best. And if the organization makes a mistake, same deal. Hey, we actually made a mistake here. Everybody needs to be aware of this. This is what we're going to do to correct it. Where I've worked in organizations where if they make a mistake, it was sweep that under the carpet. Don't tell anyone about this. And inevitably, there are other things tied to that mistake that impacts other people. And are like, what's going on here? Why is this happening?
Yeah,
And all of a sudden, no one can figure this out because they don't have the information about the initial mistake, right? And you,
correct. This
and
is
I've,
making me think of some things too. I want to talk more about this. Uh, Woof. So now we're getting onto the level, we've kind of danced around, okay, there's this individual level, there's how you can be as a leader, and now we're talking about it at an organizational level. So a couple of things. You mentioned, an onboarding process or even offboarding or when someone's let go. Those types of communications are so important because if people aren't aware of those things, imagine, imagine what can happen if someone thinks that that person still works there and they're like, hey, can you send me, like, I got locked out of my work email. Can you send me such and such file? And like, you don't know that they're fired anymore and you're just an unsuspecting user, let's say. That type of thing can happen where they would give away company information to someone and not know. And similarly, if someone hasn't started and they try to, let's say you're working at a brick and mortar place, they're trying to get in the morning and they're like, I don't have a key yet, and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa there, what are you doing? Why are you trying to like piggyback off of me? That creates those weird situations that people shouldn't have to be in.
Right.
And another thing too, when it comes to organizational communication, something I've been seeing a lot of twofold is one, we have all these layoffs happening. And one of my favorite things to do, not that layoffs are fun or anything like that, because it's awful for the people that it happens to, but in terms of how I have my own coping mechanisms around it, is I like to read the messages from the CEOs because they all sound like these really vague uh self-congratulatory chat GPT messages where it's like, with a heavy heart I had to lay off many people, and they are never really clear about the reasoning of why. And then the other part of that too is I see the same, again, it's any type of negative press, but I see the same type of behaviors surrounding if an organization has been breached. And we have new regulatory guidance and stuff coming out for
Mm.
that, and a lot more accountability because of things like that have been happening where someone would get breached and I'm just going to make up an example. It could be Disney and they're like, oopsie, we had a Mickey Mouse incident, and they're not really clear of what was impacted, or if it T-Mobile, I will name a name there, where
Yeah.
they straight up deny that they've been breached, and then suddenly you see it reported by someone else, and it's like, oh great, my social security number or whatever that might be is now floating out there, and I found out because of this organization over here, and it wasn't the one that I'm working with that told me.
Right. That the breach reporting transparency, it's an interesting one, right? Now, publicly traded companies are required to report to the SEC, and we saw one happen over the weekend. I won't mention the company's name, but they
I
said,
know
hey,
which one.
they got breached and nothing happened. They stole some signing keys.
Oh,
And
that's something.
what was interesting is Jake Williams on Twitter posted, hey, now do you honestly expect me to believe that the attacker got on your network and just happened to land on the one machine that had
Yeah,
the signing keys? Come on. There's
exactly.
more to this story.
And there has to be more to that story, because it's not just like, again, like oopsie poopsie, I just like tripped and fell into this particular endpoint that it was housing everything, or the server. That's not how it goes. Whenever it comes to a breach, there's typically, do you remember what the average dwell time for breaches is at this point?
God, that's such a moving target.
It is.
I couldn't tell you what the latest statistic is, right? And
I couldn't
I don't
either.
want to misspeak.
I don't either. But what I can say is it's usually like weeks and weeks and months, right? Like, let's
Right.
just say the most general broad statement. So these organizations will figure it out, and they have already been, I'm going to use my old 2000s leet speak. They've already been pwned, because I'm wearing the shirt too. Like, shout out to who's, I think this was Black Hills. I don't remember which particular company, but I got it at Wild West Hackin' Fest. They've been pwned for however long now, and we find out even months after that. So that's, the lack of transparency and communication across different levels, how it intersects, has so many different consequences to so many different types of people. Like, it just creates a lot of situations that could be avoided. That's how I feel when it comes to it. If everyone was just more direct, and again, not in a way that's just like, "Hey, I'm an asshole and I'm going to say what I want to say because like that's just who I am and I'm direct." No, not like that. I mean, direct in a way that's helpful.
Well, honest and direct, right? Hey, we had an
Yeah.
incident. The ego of some of the leadership in these companies, they don't want to admit that. They don't want to say, "Hey, we actually failed in some way," or or they don't want to have people find out during an investigation that things are really not what they're supposed to be, and they've been telling people that it's another way.
Yeah.
So you have that misdirection as well, and I've seen that numerous times. So there are multiple reasons why they aren't honest. I don't know the answer to that, right? You kind of have to read between the lines, and I've seen this multiple times. When I was a CISO for a bank, you have a another company you do business with get breached, and you're looking at the breach report, going, "No, there's more to this story," right? And you go back to like during the vendor management process, like you said, you had this, and this in your network. Why didn't you catch that? Right? There's something else here you're not telling me, and you see things like that all the time.
Mhm. And that makes me think of something else too. Like there's something that you're not telling me. There are certain phrases whenever it comes to these breach reports or any type of press or even internal communications that the I don't want to like sound cliche. It's almost like a red flag or a yellow flag, right? Or something where it's you get that moment where your ears just kind of stand up and you say, all right, like this is what people say whenever this happens. And that's kind of like their cover statement. Such as like we found no evidence of. And it's like you could also say that, like there's no evidence of a breach. You could also say that if you didn't look because you just didn't find evidence, right?
Right. Yeah. There's a many years ago I had this on the wall, and because of my private investigation agency, right? And it's like the terms liars use, and it had several of
Ooh,
them in
I
the
like
words
that.
they use, and it's interesting to look at that. What's the word? The
Bird.
no,
Bird is the word.
the study of language, linguistics, the linguistic
Linguistics. Yeah.
perspective of it. To they have certain words that leave room for, or they leave wiggle room, right? Or
Hedging.
they're
Yeah, it's called
intentionally
hedging.
vague and things
Uh-huh.
like that.
Yeah, it's so whenever someone hedges, they will say things and they can be like, "Well, I wasn't technically wrong because I said most of the time," or something to that effect, where they couch it and they make it to where it could be true and even if someone were to come at them and challenge them, they're like, "Well, I didn't say everything," or "I didn't," kind of like us earlier with a specific statistic, like we don't know it right now, so it's like, I mean, a lot. So it's kind of that same thing where you'll see that kind of more on a micro or even sometimes macro level where people will pretty consistently do that to avoid saying things.
Yeah, my favorite one is when you see a police officer walk up to the car and ask the driver, "Are there any weapons in the car?" And they go, "Not that I'm aware of." And you're like, "Oh, not that you're aware of, huh? So there could be weapons in here that you're unaware of,
Like
right?"
these guns.
Or if you find one, they search the car. I'm like, "Here's a gun." Well, I didn't know anything about that, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's what I say, the perfect statement to say that to for me whenever I go to any sort of like medical appointment. Well, are there any medicines that you're allergic to? That's the perfect opportunity. I say, not that I know of, because I don't know. At some point, I might start having an allergic reaction and they could come back and say, well, you said, no. And it's like, well, I didn't know then. So that's
Yeah, I
kind
think
of
that.
always my fail safe.
Yep, that's a good approach. That's a good perspective.
So yeah. Another thing that I started to sort of, my hamster was running in my head. Something that took me a little while to acclimate to was, I guess, jargon whenever it came to working at, more corporate environments and how that communication again is often couched or is often indirect, or there's a lot of implicit statements that are made to where people are forced to read between the lines. And I find that's common in business. What's your take on that?
I, I I have an aversion to that, right? I don't like that situation at all. I
I
don't like to
hope
have to
this
read
email
between the
finds you
lines.
well.
Eh, and you wonder why aren't they telling me this? Are the politics in this organization are such that they can't just literally come out and tell me the truth?
Yeah.
Or is there some other reason, right, that they're not telling me this? And ultimately, you have to dissect through these layers to determine what the actual story is. And you have to be aware of those situations when they happen.
And it's so exhausting because it can happen so frequently. You know, especially in email, that's one of my favorite things because you can tell a lot from an email. One of my and I said it too, you know, I do like linguistics. I enjoy, you know, reading about it, understanding people's intentions and motivations. And as we said, like finding particular words that really stand out. So, you know, when I look at emails and you can tell there are people who really just hone in on being passive aggressive, and that is their go-to, and they find these ways to kind of dance around being called out for it, and it's a way that they can still be mean and get away with it.
Yeah, you have those people in organizations that are. It's really hard, and I wish I could have. There's probably a word to define this, right? But right now, I'm just going to use emotional maturity, right? They can't act like an adult, and they divert to this middle school type of mentality where they're passive aggressive or they're argumentative and things like that. And you have to pick up these tricks to communicate with these people, right? So if they're argumentative, you don't argue back. I found it's best to ask these people a question. What makes you think that was okay? Or who told you that was okay? Right?
I picked that
And
up from you where I started just asking people questions.
and it kind of changes the direction of the conversation where it avoids that escalation or the resentment or in the direction that's going.
Hmm. Yeah, there's been several circumstances where I will be discussing something with someone, and there have even been circumstances where I thought, you know, in my own mind, I don't know if I'm gonna like this person. They seem, you know, aggressive, or they seem like they're always just kind of like spitting venom at people. And then sometimes you get to talking to them, and eventually you can kind of break down the wall and understand. A lot of that comes from typically some type of insecurity where they just don't feel like they can communicate on the same level as people. So often in those circumstances, I find that people will be more guarded, or they'll rely on that aggression to feel, you know, I guess above someone, or it gives them some sense of security that they have control over their environment.
That's a good point, and I saw something today that kind of relates to that. Right, there was someone posted on Twitter today that they follow a certain news group of devs, and what they're seeing in there is that the talk is becoming more and more negative with the layoffs. People are leaving the industry and things like that. And
Mhm.
one of the points that was called out is skill hoarding. So as people are getting laid off and people get insecure of their job and their role and they start skill hoarding, they become less willing to communicate and help you out when that happens.
Oh yeah,
So,
because they
so
want to remain valuable and needed. But go ahead. I'm
right.
sorry.
But that's going to affect that communication as well.
Yes, it absolutely. And I've come across people that are that way too, where they're really gatekeepy with what they know. They want to be the person that everyone turns to. So they are very careful about who they communicate with, what they share, because they don't want that, you know, with, and I'm not saying I agree with it. I understand why those people feel that way. That's not how I act. But when you're so afraid of losing your job on a consistent basis, and that's tied to your health care, that's tied to how you can afford to pay your bills, you know, having that understanding and that empathy can sometimes, again, talking about breaking down walls, it can help because I've oof, there's a lot of people out there like that. Some people get into survival mode, or they get into this more argumentative mode, to self-preserve. And again, I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I try to work with those people. And if I can't, I work around them because some of them can just be straight up. The term is missing stairs. I don't know if you've heard that before.
I haven't heard
Where
that one.
Yeah, so in case anyone doesn't know, a missing stair is basically someone that everyone kind of steps around and they avoid.
Ah,
But
okay.
yeah, so it's like they're still part of the staircase, but it's like, oh, watch out for that missing stair. Like it's here. No one's doing anything about it, but it's here. And, you know, I try to do my best to extend an olive branch to as many people as I can and give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's how I go about things. And I'm always very direct, even if it sounds, I always say, look, I'm not trying to be mean by saying this. I just point out, again, engineering brain. I point out things that I want to fix. And this is something I see that can be fixed. And it's not about you. It's not about any of that. It's about this process or this, particular behavior, not pointed at the person. And this is how we can move on from that. And that's kind of how I try to operate, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's a technical problem or a more of a personal sort of problem. I try to go about it from that same mentality.
That's a good perspective. I like that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, the
So,
missing stare. I got to remember that
missing
one.
stare. There's so many terms that I come across, and as soon as I see it, it's knowing the names of this stuff is so helpful. Like the term gaslighting, before I knew what that was, and I heard it and I read the definition, I was like, I've seen this throughout my mind is blown when you have like one word to describe a phenomenon. It just helps so much.
Right.
Word or phrase or whatever. Yes. Is there anything else that you wanted to very transparently communicate about for this first episode of the SecFlux podcast / video cast
I think we covered.
experience?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
I think. Yeah, I did it again.
One more time. I want to do it. Let's
Okay,
interrupt
we need
each other.
stoplights for this conversation. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I got a hard stop. I got another call here in 10 minutes. So I think we can wrap
I
that
do
one up.
as well. Yeah. We both we find time in the day where we can talk about things like this, and then we go on other calls. It's so funny because anytime I do a video call at work, I can't hide my dirty secret that I'm a podcaster, because like nobody has a Shure mic just for Zoom meetings.
Right.
So I always have a lot of explaining to do.
Yep. I kind of had the same thing with the Yeti mic in this setup. They're like, plus they see the sound equipment, the instruments and everything back here. And they're like, so are you a musician, podcaster? I'm like, yes.
Yeah. And I have the same thing. They can't see my audio interface because it's all scrambled on my desk. But of course you can see my art back there and my iconic blotch on my wall, where I got paint on my wall and tried to color match and color it or cover it. Can you see it?
I cannot see it. The camera doesn't pick it up.
My hand is right here and it's right above it.
Okay. Yeah.
For those,
now I see it. Now I can't unsee it.
You can't unsee it. Once you see it, it's this huge blotch. Yeah. So for those who are listening to this just over an audio medium, I have an easel behind me. I have a lot of paintings that I have. They're all hung up, and right next to the easel, there's just this huge, very obvious white blotch. Or whiter blotch than the rest of my wall, because it's like an eggshell yellowy color or kind of beigey. I don't know. I did the okayest job covering that up. It doesn't look purple anymore, and that's what counts.
There you go.
So that's it. I think that was great. You did a very good job in communicating well. So I think we both passed the test with gold stars on that one. We walk the walk and talk the talk.
Good deal. I'll take the gold star.
I will too. Well, there's never too many gold stars to go around, in my opinion.
No doubt.
So did you want to plug anything such as the SecFlux website again, like secflux.com? I may have just done it
I think you just did it for me. There you go. You saved me the trouble.
If you have the time and the capacity to look at secflux.com, you should do that, because as Joe mentioned, it is a news aggregate site. We also write blogs. And the great thing about it is a lot of different cybersecurity news resources plugged into one area, to where you don't have to just, I don't know, go to a bunch of different sites, have a bunch of different tabs open, like save your RAM capabilities, and you just have the one open.
There you go.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
and it has a really cool cyberpunk sort of feel. Did you say that?
Yeah, the aesthetic of it is very cyberpunk, futuristic. It's not business-like at all. It's not your business.
Not your business. I like that.
Not your business aesthetic.
It's
formal tie.
Leadership. Yeah.
That's just not me.
It's not me either. I don't like wearing ties. I don't know how to tie a tie.
I unfortunately do.
I'm sorry. Well, Uh, in the future, we'll make sure that all of your ties are very radical and or have some type of thing that lights up on them.
That'd
If
be
you do
great.
have to wear one, like
LEDs.
it's got like LEDs or like a chipset or something on it.
There you go.
And I think that's all we have then. So as mentioned, go to secflux.com.
There you go.
Find your
Check out the
true self.
website. Follow us on Mastodon, X,
Mastodon,
Twitter, whatever the hell it is nowadays.
Twitter. Yeah.
And engage with us. Let us know what
Do
you
it.
think.
Let us know what you think. And do it in a way that's clear and transparent and
Yeah.
direct.
There you go. Came full circle with that.
It did. Woo! We did it.
Awesome.
We did it, Reddit.